in creating a video game using Celeste as our main example. This is my group members. So what is Celeste? Celeste can be described as this very immersive and story-driven 2D platformer, organized by Mary Thorson and Noel Berry. It is one of those indie games which makes it seem like a case study of game design in my digital media course. The players assume the role of a young lady called Madeline, who tries to ascend Celeste Mountain. During the adventure, the players will encounter tough platforming, as well as encounter characters that are various aspects of the emotions of Madeline. The story tells more of self-acceptance, perseverance, and not giving up regardless of the challenges, depending on the progress of the player. So each member of our group will take on the challenge of explaining the different aspects of the game. First up, we have game level designer. Level designer talks about how the different stages of the game are built, such as levels difficulty, the challenges in the game, the puzzles, and how they guide the player throughout the levels. Next up, we have game producer. The producer of the game is responsible for describing the stages of the game, the theme of the game, the background, and is responsible for giving an overview of the game. Next up, we have game sound designer. Sound designer of the game is responsible for describing the sound effects of the game, the beats, music, and how the audio creates mood and emotion throughout the game. Next up, we have game artist. Game artist is responsible for describing the art in the game, such as the color scheme, the character design, the levels layout, and how the visuals support the story of the gameplay. Last but not the least, we have game programmer. Game programmer is responsible for covering the game mechanics and how the controls work, how the character is supposed to move, how would obstacle react, and what makes the gameplay feel smooth. Each of us will cover one role and explain how that role contributed to Celeste's development. With that, let's start our presentation. Alright, so let's begin with one of the most important roles in game development, the level designer. A level designer is a person who creates the actual spaces, challenges, and the paths and the player that interacts with. In simple words, they shape the entire journey that the player experiences from start to the end of the game. This role is extremely important in platformer games like Celeste because the gameplay is very movement based, precise, and skill focused. Every jump, every gap, every enemy, and every small platform must be designed carefully so the game feels challenging but still fair. In Celeste, the level design is famous for being both difficult and meaningful. The whole game is about climbing a mountain, and that climbs represent Madeline's internal struggles. So the level designer had to think not only about creating fun platformer stages, but also about how each level reflects the emotions and story themes. For example, some areas are designed to feel overwhelming or chaotic to represent Madeline's anxiety. Other levels are calm and open, giving players a moment to breathe. This emotional storytelling through level design is one of the reasons Celeste became so popular. A level designer doesn't just place blocks and platforms randomly. They go through a long process that starts with brainstorming ideas. They think what questions like what do I want the player to feel here? Should this area be feel should this area be fast paced or slow? Do I want to introduce a new mechanic or challenge? How can I guide the player without giving direct instructions? After planning, they create rough sketches or simple test layouts. They are not polished, but they help test if the gameplay idea works. Then they build the real level inside the game engine, where they can test movement, timing, difficulty, and spacing. In Celeste, the level designer also had to work closely with the other teammates. For example, they collaborated with the game programmer to make sure the mechanics like dashing, jumping, and climbing feel smooth and responsive. The level design relies heavily on the controls working perfectly, so both roles constantly test and adjust their work together. The level designer also collaborates with the game artist. Once the level layout is approved, the artist adds visual elements like backgrounds, decorations, and animated objects. This helps bring the entire environment to life and makes the level look polished rather than empty. Another key part of level designing is pacing. In Celeste, the difficulty increases gradually. The game slowly introduces new mechanics such as dash crystals, obstacles. The level designer is responsible for deciding when and where these appear, so the player learns naturally through gameplay. The goal is to teach a player without a long tutorial. Instead, the level itself shows them how things work. Celeste's level designer also paid extra attention to accessibility. They created features like assist mode, which allows players to change difficulty settings or slow down gameplay if they need help. Even though this is technically a programming feature, the level designer still had to think about their levels would still had to think about their levels would feel for players using their accessibility options. Testing is another huge part of their job. Level designers must test their own levels multiple times to make sure everything flows correctly. They also watch they also watch other testers play to see whether players struggle or get stuck. If something feels too frustrating or confusing, the level designer goes back and tweaks the design. In Celeste's case, this was especially important because the game is known for being challenging but fair. It had to be difficult without feeling impossible, something that makes Celeste unique in its advanced movement mechanics, the wall jumps and the air dashes. Designing levels that use these mechanics creatively is not easy. The level designer has to place objects in a way that forces the player to use movement skills in interesting patterns. Sometimes obstacles push the player to experiment and other times they reward perfect timing. All of this requires a lot of creativity, patience, and attention to detail. Even a small change, like moving a platform one tile higher, can completely change how the level feels. To summarize, the level designer in Celeste shaped the heart of the game. They created the structure of each chapter, designed the challenges, and ensured that gameplay and story work together. Their choices directly influence the emotional journey of the player, making Celeste not just a normal platformer, but a deep, meaningful experience.
Next, to continue this presentation, I, Shazeb Sheikh, will talk about the role of game producer, which is one of the most important people in any game development team. A game producer is basically the project manager of the entire game. They are responsible for making sure the game is completed on time, stays within budget, and maintains a consistent creative vision. While the level designer, artists, sound designers, and programmers focus on their individual tasks, the producer focuses on the big picture. They make sure everyone is working in the right direction and that the entire team is communicating properly. In the case of Celeste, the producer was Maddie Thorson. She was not only the creator of the story and main lead of the project, but also the person who kept the entire development organized. Her role as a producer involved planning the overall timeline of the game, deciding what needed to be worked on first, what needed to be improved, and how features should be prioritized. Mainly, a producer has to think about things like how much time do we have and what features are essential, what should we put more development effort, how do we keep the team motivated and focused. These decisions are extremely important because game development is unpredictable. Sometimes a mechanic doesn't work as planned. Sometimes an artist needs more time, sometimes the level design becomes too complicated and needs rewrites. The producer keeps everything under control and adjusts the plan when necessary. In Solid's development, the producer had to balance the emotional storytelling with the gameplay vision. Celeste is a game with deep themes about anxiety, self-doubt, and overcoming challenges. Maddie had to ensure that every part of the game supported those themes. This involved consistent meetings, discussions, and decision making with the rest of the team. Another part of the producer's job is communication. They act as a bridge between the different team members, the artists, programmers, writers, designers, and sound team. If the level designer wants a new mechanic, the producer talks to the programmer to check if it's possible. If an artist needs a change the wish to the visuals, the producer ensures it matches the story vision. They help all the parts of the game fit together smoothly. The producer also handles quality control. They make sure the game is polished and consistent. In Celis, this meant reviewing every chapter mechanic and story moment to ensure the game felt cohesive. Celis has a very unique emotional tone, so the producer had to make sure nothing in the game broke that feeling. Producers also coordinate testing. They look at player feedback during play tests, identify the problems, and decide what needs fixing for precision platformer like Celis. This was crucial. If players felt a section was too unfair, too confusing, or too frustrating, the producer worked with designers to adjust it. Another responsibility is managing resources, basically deciding what the team should spend their time and effort on. Since Celis was developed by a small indie team, resources were limited. That means the producer had to be very strategic. They had to choose which features were worth the investment and which ones could be removed without hurting the game. For example, early versions of Celis had many more mechanics, characters, and levels, but the producer had to trim things to keep the game focused and fun. This is a key strength of good producers. They help the team stay focused on what matters the most. Finally, the producer is responsible for making sure that the game releases smoothly. This includes preparing marketing, handling release schedules, and coordinating with publishers for platforms like Steam and Nintendo Switch. Even though Silence is small, these tasks were still necessary for the game to reach its audience. In summary, the game producer of Celis played a huge role in shaping the final experience. They guided the project from starting to finish, kept the team organized, protected the creative direction, balanced the workload, and ensured every part of the game supported its emotional message. Without the producer, the game wouldn't have been as polished, meaningful, or cohesive as it turned out to be.
A game artist is responsible for creating all the visual elements that make the game world come to life. This includes the character background, environments, animation, user interference, and every detail the player sees on the screen in Celeste. These visuals were created by the lead game artist Amora B, who played a major role in giving the game its signature pixel art style. A game artist begins by understanding the word and tone of the game. For Celeste, the atmosphere needed to be emotional, warm, and expressive. The visuals had to support the story of Madeline climbing the mountain and detailing with her inner struggles. This meant the art couldn't just look nice; it needed to communicate with feelings. The artist creates concept skeletons first, which help decide what the environment and character should look like. Celeste, environment, snowy mountain, abandoned cities, mystical temples were all drawn with intention. Each chapter has a distinct visual theme that reflects Madeline's emotional state. For example, dark, chaotic levels represent anxiety, while brighter environments represent hope or clarity. Next, the artist designed the character. Madeline, the main character, needs to be instantly recognizable even in a tiny pixel art. Her scarf, hair color, and animation all help express her personality. Aroma B also designed Madeline's movement, her jump animation, climbing motions, and dashes, making sure they feel smooth and expressive. One of the biggest challenges in creating Celeste was maintaining consistency across all levels. Pixel art requires high precision. A single pixel can change how a character face looks. The artist has to make sure every background, every object, and every animation match the game's overall style. The game artist also worked closely with the level designer. Once a level layout was created, the artist added visual details, platforms, decoration, background layers, and animated elements. This transforms a plain level into a beautiful and immersive space. Without the artist, the level would look empty and lifeless. Another important part of the artist's job is creating visual feedback, where Madeline dashes, the artist added brighter trails and effects so the move feels powerful. When she dies, the pixel animation is quick and clear, helping players reset instantly without frustration. These small details greatly improve gameplay. The artist also worked with the sound team and programmer to make sure visual matched audio cues and mechanics. For example, when a dash crystal refills, the visual glow and sound effect syncs perfectly. This teamwork helps create satisfying gameplay. In summary, the game artist shaped Celeste's entire look and emotional tone. Their art made the game recognizable, expressive, and immersive. Without their visual creativity, Celeste wouldn't be the iconic award-winning experience it is today. Thank you.
Hello, this is Muhammad Saad, and I've taken on the role of sound designer for the game Celeste. A sound designer is the person responsible for creating and shaping all the audio you hear in a game. Everything from footsteps, jumping sounds, wind and weather effects, menu clicks, and even the tiny feedback noises that tell the player they pressed a button correctly. The role is much more than just adding sounds. A sound designer carefully thinks about how each sound should feel, when it should play, and how it affects the player's emotional experience. Good sound design can make a world feel alive, believable, and responsive, and it also helps players understand timing, danger, and rhythm in the gameplay. In Celeste, sound plays an extremely important role because the entire game is built around precision platforming. Every movement Madeline makes, such as jumping, dashing, climbing, sliding, or landing, has a clean and sharp sound effect. These sounds help the player build a sense of timing. For example, the dash is very fast and crisp, so players instantly know the exact moment the dash begins and ends. This is important because Celeste requires quick reactions, and audio becomes a tool that supports gameplay skill. Celeste also uses sound to shape the emotional feeling of each chapter. The strong winds on the mountains, the crunch of snow, the echo inside caves, or the ghostly ambience in the mirror temple all add personality to the environment. The audio never feels random, it always reflects Madeline's mental and emotional journey. When the environment is calm, the sound is soft and subtle. When the chapter becomes stressful or chaotic, the sound becomes more intense. This makes the player feel connected to what Madeline is experiencing. The head sound designer of Celeste was Kevin Regime from Power of Audio, and he played a huge role in shaping how the game feels. Kevin created all the sound effects for movement, interactions, collectibles, and hazards. He carefully designed the audio to be sharp, responsive, and satisfying, so players always feel in control. He also built the environmental soundscapes, winds, crystals, magic pulses, and the atmospheric sounds in the Mirror Temple. Each chapter of Celeste has its own identity because of the audio choices he made. Another important part of Kevin's contribution was how closely he worked with the game's composer, Lena Raine. Celeste's soundtrack is famous for being emotional and adaptive. The music changes based on what is happening in that level. For this system to work, the sound effects and the music must blend together perfectly. Kevin and Lena coordinated the timing, the frequencies, and the volume balancing so that the music never overpowers the sound effects, and the sound effects never interrupt the emotional flow of the music. Their collaboration is one of the main reasons Celeste's audio feels so smooth and natural. One of the clever things about Celeste's sound design is how it reinforces the game's main themes, especially anxiety and perseverance. For example, Madeline, the darker version of Madeline, has glitchy and distorted sound effects that represent fear and self doubt. Meanwhile, checkpoint sounds, collectible chimes, and progress indicators use warm tones to reward the player and give a sense of hope. These audio choices are subtle, but they have a strong emotional impact. Overall, the sound design of Celeste does much more than just accompany the visuals. It guides the player's emotions, supports the platforming mechanics, and helps tell the story without relying on many words. Kevin Regime's work, combined with Lena Raine's soundtrack, makes the entire world of Celeste feel alive, challenging, and meaningful. Without this level of detail and expressive sound design, Celeste would not have the same emotional power or the same smooth gameplay experience. Moving on to the next.
To continue with the presentation, I, Abdullah Mir, will be presenting the role of a game programmer. So, what is a game programmer? A game programmer is responsible for writing the code that makes the game function. They turn ideas from designers, artists, and sound teams into a working, playable experience. In Celeste, the lead programmer was Noel Berry, who built the core mechanics and the system of the game. The programmer starts by creating the movement system. In Celeste, this includes running, jumping, climbing, wall jumping, and this iconic air dash. These mechanics had to feel extremely smooth and precise. Noel spent a lot of time tweaking physics values, acceleration, friction, gravity, and timing to make sure the controls felt perfect. Programming isn't just writing code, it's constant testing and refinement. If the jump felt too slow, Noel adjusted the code. If the dash felt too short, he changed the distance. Every tiny change affected the entire game. Celeste control are one of the main reasons it became so successful, and this is thanks to the programmer's work. Programmers also create systems for level design. The level designer builds layout, but the programmer makes the mechanic work. Moving platforms, breakable blocks, enemies, switches, hazard, and special objects like dash crystals. Noel also programmed the physics engine, how Madeline interacts with the walls, slopes, platforms, and obstacles. This required deep understanding of timing and collision direction. Another huge part of the job was implementing performance optimization. Celeste runs smoothly on all platforms, including Nintendo Switch, PC, and consoles. This requires clean, efficient code so the game doesn't lag or freeze. Programmers also work closely with the artist. They help implement animations, particle effects, and transitions. For example, the dash trail. The dash trail effect appears because the programmer coded it to the trigger at the right time. The programmer also worked with the sound designer to make sure audio triggers correctly and matches gameplay actions. Every sound, landing, climbing, collecting is connected to code. One of Noel's biggest contributions was helping build SS Mode, an accessibility feature that allows player to adjust speed, infinite stamina, invisibility, and more. This required complex coding to ensure the game remained stable even with modified physics. Finally, programmers fix bugs. Anytime something breaks, a character gets stuck, a level loads incorrectly, a sound loops endlessly, the programmer must find the exact code causing the issue and repair it. In summary, the game programmer brought Celeste to life. They created the mechanics, physics, system tools, and features that make the game playable. Without Noel's code, Celeste would not exist as the polished, responsive, and beloved platformer it is today.